Fabio Quartararo. We were really, talking last week about he's going to be looking at different places. He can't continue at Yamaha. Honda was an opportunity. And it certainly, the weekend started off not in a good place for Fabio or Yamaha, but at the end, they seem to have found something, and away he went into quite a bit of a dominant win.
Why is it I get the feeling this is the week I get the sack for things I say? Because it feels that way. Honestly, I said it on Twitter earlier on in the weekend that Fabio Quartararo basically is the Marc Marquez of Yamaha. Without Fabio Quartararo, Yamaha would be in the deepest doo-doo. They're just not performing with anyone else, in the hands of anyone else. It's Quartararo who's cutting the mustard every time. For whatever the reason, he manages to make that package work when it's possible to make it work. Just like Marquez used to do with Honda. I mean, there was no one else that really could consistently get the kind of results that Marc did on the Honda. And pretty much it's still the same, of course, but your Honda are just a little bit at sea at the moment. I mean, what a year. We've had 10 different podium finishes. That's more than anybody in Moto3 or Moto2. Quartararo, he's good round there. It sorts Portimao. They've got, maybe the fact that the bike hasn't changed at all suited the fact they've got no data. They only had one dry session, which was the warm-up session on the Sunday morning where it was really cold. Everything else had been wet and miserable and patchy and dodgy. So the fact was that the Yamaha, by virtue of the fact it hadn't changed that much, they got the same tyres on as they had last year, I think. So data-wise, they got everything they needed. And the fact there was no changes to the Yamaha, maybe that was an advantage for Quartararo. That kind of analysis, of course, is not available to any of us journalistic types, so we'll never actually know whether that's the truth or not. But carnage in qualifying, very, very difficult qualifying indeed to make it work for you. Suzuki's looking good again. I mean, that start that Mir got off the line was just superb. Really thought that, those two world champions were going to go head to head. We all thought the Suzuki would be the bike that was coming together towards the end of the race because it used to look after its tyres really well, but everything's turned on its head a little bit now, and it seems like that's the case across all the manufacturers now. They seem to have dialed in those tyres and the settings they need to make them work. But a great ride from Quartararo. On the day that the racing managing director had his 400th race, Quartararo absolutely dug him out of a massive great hole. Lynn Jarvis, I've never seen Lynn Jarvis with a bigger grin on his face because basically, his job and the factory's jobs must have looked just a little bit tenuous over the last few months with the way that they haven't made any progress. But yet, on his 400th Grand Prix, for Lynn Jarvis, the managing director of racing, they get a win from nowhere. Brilliant. Quartararo was imperious. There was no one that could get near him. And he didn't look like he was going to make a mistake anywhere either. What a racetrack, Portugal, though, eh? I mean, just to divert slightly, flyby, brilliant national anthem on the grid, despite the weather and all the rest of it. Okay, only 44,000 people or something at trackside. Perhaps that's not so many as you might expect. But Portugal put on a real show despite the weather.
You said it all there, Keith, I think. But yeah, just to underline, what a ride by Quartararo, wasn't it? I mean, the next best Yamaha, not even in the top 10, Dovizioso, 29 seconds. I mean, it does show how much Yamaha do need Quartararo. He's grabbing every opportunity, isn't he? We saw him happy with 7th place in Kota, and he was saying, look, I'm doing everything. I'm getting everything I can out of the bike. This track didn't have the big long straights, did it? With his top speed is really hurting him, and he was able to do a bit more and take every chance, wasn't it? Those treacherous conditions on Saturday, Rins, we saw fantastic ride, but his race chance of victory was gone on Saturday with those qualifying so far back. Bagnaia at the back of the grid, Bastianini at the back of the grid. Maybe they could have made a race of it, but not starting back there. So who knows? But Quartararo faultless under all of those difficult conditions, all that pressure. So yeah, really, really brilliant ride from him. And he was asked, does this make your decision easier for next year? And he said no. So he's certainly, I think he wants to see that there are going to be some major changes to this Yamaha. There was a bit of discussion during the weekend. Dovi saying, look, this bike needs grip. It needs rear grip. Dovi, of course, has ridden the Aprilia and the Ducati recently. Quartararo is saying, look, I need power. If you gave me that time that I was losing on the straights in Kota, I'd have been in the victory fight. So slightly different priorities there. But as Dovi was quite openly saying, Fabio is the only guy that can ride this bike at the moment. And Sunday was just another illustration of that.
So many things, Pete, that you've just brought up there that I'm like this trying to get in. I felt like I was trying to drop the clutch at the time. The Yamaha isn't the fastest thing in the straight line. but it still had the beating of the Suzuki down the front straight because it seemed to have rear grip coming out of that final corner. Hang on a minute, what is this conundrum we're talking about here? This is the thing that everyone else is complaining about, but Quartararo manages to find the kind of grip that gets him alongside the Suzuki and perhaps a few mile an hour faster than Suzuki in a straight line, when the Suzuki now is a bit quicker than the Honda, the Yamaha in most places. I mean, the whole thing doesn't make any sense to me. It's Quartararo is able to somehow, on this day, get the best out of that motorbike. And we've heard about the rear grip problem. Why? You know, what's the difference? What's Quartararo doing that Dovi can't do? And there's a really, really skilled man. We're talking about a guy that has got just acres of experience with every single different type of motorbike there is. So I don't understand what the problem is. Morbidelli just doesn't seem to be the Morbidelli of past at the moment. Whether that's because he still carries a slight injury, whether that's because he's not prepared to put his neck on the line when he's not got a bike doing exactly what he wants it to do. And that's what I have to say, intelligent riders, and he is one, and so is Dovi, it's what you tend to find is they will not ride that final little bit, that final bit of commitment, if the bike isn't as they want it to be, if they cannot find that bit that they want to make them move forward. And maybe that's why we're not seeing the best out of Dovizioso and Morbidelli. They're too clever to hurt themselves, perhaps, by chucking it on the line. But Quartararo doesn't look like he's putting anything on the line. He just looks fast everywhere. He doesn't look wild at all. There was no one could get near him. It was just a brilliant, brilliant ride. Did we have him in our sweepstakes, by the way? Did we?
Well. Keith, you put him for the win. I don't know whether you're playing blissful ignorance there.
No, I am. Honestly,
I had to do a double take when I looked at where we predicted, and I went, "Oh my god, Keith actually predicted the winner." That's.
I know I got third place.
You got the 1 point.
I know I got third place.
And you, and you got third place.
Yeah,
I've done you a disservice there.
I knew I put the lace in there.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Pete. 0 on the board, nothing. And me, once again, it's not really a shocker. I got nothing either. If only, Rins. Well, I got Rins and Mir. I had faith in the Suzukis, but Keith has now taken a step ahead in our standings.
The Suzuki thing was a really good shout. I mean, I have to say that Mir looked, like that's great start. He looked the quality that we know he is, but again, not quite a podium this time around. But the Suzukis are there or thereabouts. Going to Jerez, it's going to be great the next round as well. This weekend, we ain't got long to wait, have we? So,
it's. I mean, you said it on your Twitter, Keith. I think we never think each season can get any better than the previous, and it just does, doesn't it? And you just
it's a shame. It's a shame for Bagnaia, though. I mean, Bagnaia is for me Rins was the ride of the day in my view. Came from 23rd on the grid. Rins rode brilliantly. Bagnaia, he ain't going to catch a break this year, is he? It's going to be one of them unlucky years at the end of the day. And I think that Bagnaia, great expectations. It couldn't have gone more flatter or hurt him more. I mean, he took another great beat. To start off the back of the grid. He did well to score points, but Rins was my man of the match this weekend, that's for sure.
Just, picking up on what you said there about Fabio Quartararo as well, if you want to check out more on the Crash MotoGP YouTube channel, Jordan has put up a video about, is indeed, as we're discussing now, Quartararo to Yamaha what Marc Marquez is to Honda. So that is one to check out as well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and you can see all of our podcast videos as well. At the end of the MotoGP race, at least, it is now Fabio Quartararo who leads the standings, tied really with Alex Rins on 69 points, but due to count back and having a win, goes to the top. It's interesting though, isn't it? If anybody had just switched on and joined for this one race, not having seen the previous starts of the season and seeing Fabio Quartararo out on top, they would have gone, predictable, isn't it? Obviously, the reigning champion's going to be up there. The story couldn't be further from the truth. We'll come back to a bit of MotoGP talk in a moment. I would like to move on, though, to Moto2 as well, because there was a lot of carnage and action in that. It was Jake Dixon on pole, but sadly crashed out on lap 1. That allowed, the American Joe Roberts to claim his first win, but it wasn't as straightforward as that, was it, Pete? It was a dominant victory in the end, but it was a restarted race after that huge incident, which it took out so many drivers that only 15 were registered as finishing at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it was So yeah, we should start. Let's rewind a bit. Moto2 was the last race of the day, wasn't it? We had this unusual schedule. So it went Moto3, MotoGP, Moto2. So Moto3 and MotoGP fully dry, and then these clouds that have played a part all weekend sort of came in, but not as obvious as they came in on practice, where it was absolutely soaked, wasn't it? The track was flooded. This was more sort of a light rain, but it seems like it was raining, from what some of the riders said after the race, from about 2 or 3 laps in. Now, again, it was very light rain and the race wasn't stopped. And this is where the controversy is. There's some riders, some teams, the Pons team in particular, who suffered the most there, because Aaron Canet was leading and we saw Canet high-sided, I think was it turn 2, fast high-side. And then just behind him, the other 2 guys as well, Cameron Bobier, Ayagura, all fell at the same time. And then it was just one bike after another following them into the gravel. Now, Canet, unfortunately, has broken his arm. He's off for surgery. He's also broken the finger as well. So the others seem to have escaped largely unharmed, but yeah, for Canet, I mean, it's got big consequences for him, and I mean, he and his team were pretty clear. The red flag should have come out sooner there.
Really tricky decision. I mean, I got asked so many times on social media during the course of the weekend, you know, was it the right decision? You can only make that kind of decision if you're on site. I always struggle to criticize anybody anywhere when we're this far away from it. Quite often, if we're not at trackside, you're not experiencing what they're experiencing. The problem is, when you've got a bit of mental rain, a little bit on your visor, perhaps, a little bit on the screen, it's making no difference particularly to track grip. But clearly, on that corner, at that time, it got a little bit more intense. And I think it just caught the stewards out, the race direction out. It should have, clearly, there should have been a red flag a little earlier, because, you know, it was carnage. When everybody falls down en masse like that, you know that they've got it wrong. But what they're trying to do is, it's the last race of the day, so they're not up against the usual television constraints. It's not like they've got all the kind of restrictions that they've normally got. Got to get the MotoGP race out at such and such a time, rah. That's the main race of the day. That was done. So they had the time parameters to be able to stop the race, but they made a conscious decision not to stop it because they didn't believe that the slight mizzle, if you like, that slight drizzle that they were getting was going to affect the race. But then, of course, it did. So it ultimately was the wrong decision. They should have stopped it earlier. Championship contenders, I mean, I look down here at the list of them. I mean, Ayagura, Tony Arbolino, Aaron Canet, obviously, Somkiat Chantra, you know, all these guys, Sam Lowes, of course, as well. They're all non-starters back in it. Augusto Fernandez. These are some fairly big names that couldn't restart, that couldn't make the 5-minute gate that they've got to bring the bike around the track. They've got to continue around the track. They can't take a shortcut. If they can get it back to pit lane within 5 minutes of the race being stopped, then they can restart in the restart. But of course, some took shortcuts, some bikes were damaged, and some riders were as well. So it kind of ruled it out. But I think, with hindsight, wrong decision. But I do understand what the race direction were trying to do. And it wasn't the usual pressures that race direction are under to try and get a race done before it moves MotoGP as a time slot. So unfortunate, very unfortunate indeed.
There were a lot of riders and teams who were quite annoyed, actually. Those who'd managed to get back to the garages and make repair works as well, wanted to try and take the restarts. Do you think they should have been allowed?
Well, the rule's quite, you know, it's there in the rule book. It's within 5 minutes or you don't. And you haven't got to take short. Right. There were some people that brought bikes in the back of the garages that had assistance from marshals, so on and so forth. I mean, you know, where'd you draw the line? I mean, it's going to link us neatly to track limits in a minute when I get to this. I mean, I hate that phrase, rules are rules, because I'm not the kind of person that likes rules are rules. That's, you know, like, rules are there for twisting and finding a way around and all the rest of it. In my book, that's what, you know, that's what furthers developments. It's what furthers everything. You got a rule book and you try to make the best out of it if you can. But this rule is pretty strict. It's there as, you know, part of it. You have got to go via the track back to pit lane within 5 minutes of the red flag. So, you know, those that didn't make it. It's fairly clear cut. It's always good to see Mike Trimby getting some exercise in pit lane, I've got to say. Head of Erta. You only ever see him out there when there's a crisis. Big Mike.
Well, rules are rules, and we will shortly be discussing all sorts of rules in a moment. But let's finish off with Moto3 as well. Or just to reiterate, so Moto2, it was obviously the dominant win in the end by Joe Roberts ahead of a lucky Celestino Vietti, really, was second, and Jorge Navarro in third. Leading the championship now is Sergio Garcia ahead of Dennis that's Moto3. Moto2 championship is Vietti ahead of Ayagura and Tony Arbolino, the top three in that
34
championship.
points, Harry. 34 points.
It's a big lead, isn't it?
Massive. I mean, Ayagura dipped out massively there as well. So Vietti, pretty lucky with that. There's no doubt about it. Joe Roberts, though, it's John Kaczynski since we last saw a bloody American in the middleweight class. I've got to say, you've got to go back a long time. I mean, were you born then, Harry? I can't remember. But
No.
I think it's about 11 years. I think it's 11 years ago. So you might be 12 by now.
Just about.
But the point being is that it's funny because Kenny Roberts made a comment in COTA that, oh, mate, that must have bloody been like someone being jabbed with a sharp stick when he was disappointed that Cameron Beaubier and Roberts hadn't done more in Grand Prix. I remember I watched it. It was the BT Sport comments that he also took the mickey out of me, of course, when they were on about the amount of money we all got paid for the post TT or whatever it was at Mallory Park. I think he got 10 grand and I got 25 quid, and he said we were both overpaid. Good old Kenny, I love him. It wasn't my first ever payday in motorbike racing. He is a little bit older than me, but anyway. But Kenny was quite stern over Cameron Beaubier. It's typical American, isn't it? No quarter given when it comes to the likes of Kenny Roberts. He is a hard, fast man. You know, take no prisoners. And his comment was quite sharp, I thought, that he expected more from the Americans. And then one goes and wins the weekend after he said that, which I find quite amusing. So take that, Kenny. One up the bum for you.
Well done, Joe Roberts. Moto3, before we come back to some MotoGP and a bit of World Superbike action as well. Dennis Onchi was on pole, but it was Sergio Garcia who took his second win of the season ahead of Jaume Masia and Ayumu Sasaki. A five-way battle really up at the front, wasn't it, Pete, until Garcia sort of took control of it in the latter stages. Good rides as well from some of the young Brits involved. Scott Ogden rubbing shoulders with some of the more regular riders. So good runs from them. And John McPhee turned up but wasn't allowed to race.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he turned up and basically wasn't passed fit by the MotoGP doctors. Not passed fit for this weekend coming up at Jerez as well, we should say. Okay. So John will have to wait for Le Mans after that. So yeah, I mean, he's been trying to, we've kept hearing it would be the next race, haven't we? And fortunately, it's obviously serious injury, vertebrae. You don't want to take chances. And I think the medical team, they viewed, we know this year they're a lot stricter on everything. Marc Marquez also mentioned this after his accident that you brought up earlier, Harry, that when he got back to the pit lane, the doctor was firing questions at him, what gear were you in? What corner were you in? All these kind of things. And he said, look, in Indonesia, I couldn't answer immediately, but here I could. And so they are a lot stricter. Mark said that. And this is another example of that with John, where they didn't just say, jump up and down and do some press-ups. They wanted to see the scans, everything else. And they said, look, we don't think the bone is healed enough. And, you just need a bit more time. So that's why he wasn't allowed to race. So, yeah, he was missing. But as you say, Scott Ogden, fantastic, weekend for him, showing what he could do. I think he was up to 6th in the race at one stage. His teammate Josh Watley got through to qualifying 2 as well, didn't he, I think? So both of them, fantastic. But taking advantage of the, should we say, English weather a bit, weren't they, in qualifying? But, yeah. Another step, building that confidence, and they know they can do it. They know they can compete with these guys now. So
I think Josh Watley going through qualifying 1 was a big deal. Getting into qualifying 2, only 4 riders go through, and he did a good job as far as that was concerned. But Scott Ogden made a step. I mean, he was up there. He was ahead of Foggia for so long. I mean, it was a really good ride from Scott Ogden early on in that race. He will have learned so much from that. The experience of riding around those kind of guys. Further you move forward in the grid, mind you, they're all pretty hot anyway, Moto3. But when you're up in that top 10, like he was consistently and fighting for those places as well, I thought Scott Ogden, he's looking like the real deal to me. Vision Track Racing, Michael Laverty's team is a great little team anyway, but it's all brand new. Everything's brand new. This is the first year. This is the equivalent of going back to Sepang International Circuit, the Petronas MotoGP team, when it was all put together within 6 months and came out the box bang straight on the pace. This is the same thing in Moto3 for Vision Track, for Michael Laverty to put that team together in the short time he has. Two virtually unknown riders as far as the Grand Prix is concerned. Josh Whatley, is riding well, but Scott Ogden is a step ahead. He's looking really like a real deal Grand Prix rider straight away out the box. So big ups to all of that team. I think they're doing a great job. Really, really good job.
Indeed, top work. Well, at the end of all that, it was Sergio Garcia who is now leading the championship. 1 point just between him and Dennis Foggia with 82 points in second. Jaume Masia third. Andrea Minu and Dennis Onju the top 5 in the Moto3 class. Now, Keith, rules are rules. And as we look ahead to MotoGP and World Superbikes racing at the weekend, just gone World Superbikes MotoGP